okay, this journey of learning how to share my faith with others has been, I think, a tricky one for me to figure out, because taking what I've learned as I've started following Jesus about a little over 10 years ago, I at first thought I had to sort of like ditch all normal person tendencies and opt into like a more like formulaic, robotic, Christian scripted version in order to share with people. And so I think I swung that way for a while. In the last probably 4 or 5 years, I'm learning that actually no, a lot of the like relational component is where it starts. Like equity building is like number one. And I'm learning that more and more over time. There's a few different people I've gotten to walk with who are also on different parts of their journey. Sometimes it's sharing with non-believers who are opposed or starting at like a ground zero. And then sometimes it looks so different for someone who's like already curious about God or wanting to follow him, but like not knowing where to start or just wanting to learn more. And I think like even the angle of sharing for those two different people might be different.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love that you said, you had a journey from formula to relationship. I think it's always relational when it's one-on-one.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's different ways to share the gospel. You can do it in a large group or in a larger audience or in a small group, and you can do it one-on-one. And I think most of us right now are thinking, how do I share my faith? So how do I do it one-on-one? And if you don't have a relationship, you can't actually share. I mean, that's the first thing. It's like nobody wants your opinion unless they want your opinion.
You've got to earn it.
Yeah. And so there is this thing where really in order to share, someone needs to ask you to share, which means you must have been somehow demonstrated that you care about them, that you have something to add to the conversation, that you can see something that they can't see.
Do you think that ask has to be like direct, or can it be indirect?
Oh, like I think it's always indirect. I think it's always indirect, and that you got to listen for when that question's coming. I said always indirect. I mean, sometimes I've had people say, what do you believe about Jesus?
But that's like the anomaly.
But that is, well, it's the exception for sure. But you have to be aiming at. See, well, I think I said this the other day to somebody, but we think that we need to love somebody so that we can share the gospel. And I think if it's not in your head that unless I share the gospel, I can't love you. Like, sharing the gospel is the demonstration of love.
Which means we first have to fully believe that ourselves. Like, this is the best thing ever.
Yes.
And I have to share this, not because I'm obligated, but because I want to. And
because there's no other way to find
understand
life
that
if you
as
don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it takes away that weirdness of, that disingenuous, I'm going to love you first. And then when you trust me, then I'll get the opportunity to share. It's like,
it's not a bait and switch.
No, I'm going to share because I love you. And that's what's got to really be the heart of the matter and driving it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you have, like, you've done work overseas before, you've done work cross-culturally, you've done work here, even like I think of the work that you do in the physical therapy world. What does that look like in terms of like caring for the holistic person? Where do you discern the openings to have conversations like that? Like, what are things that maybe even you've journeyed through with people where you're like, oh, I sense this is a time where they're looking for something like this. Maybe it's spiritual, or maybe it's like, where do you find those moments?
Well, I think there's two kind of aspects to it. I think the first thing is that I'm always asking God every day, like, show me where you're working. And so I'm trying to look at people at the outset through spiritual eyes. It's like, we can all see.
It's a daily practice for you.
Yeah, what's happening on the outside, but how does your behavior tell me something about what's happening internally inside of you? And so I'm looking for that. But then the other, like the way I learned to fish is to ask questions. you got to be curious about people and want to know not just what they think, but why do you think that? Like, how'd you arrive at that conclusion? Because for a lot of people, sometimes we know why we think and believe what we do, but a lot of times we don't. And so even as I'm asking questions, people I think are discovering for themselves sort of their own difficulties with their own worldview. And they may not know what their worldview is unless somebody asks them to articulate it.
They haven't had to reconcile those things
Yeah,
before.
and then once you start asking questions, we can see the discrepancies and how sometimes what we believe about the world doesn't actually work.
Yeah.
And it's good questions that'll do that for you.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I came to this realization like probably like a year ago, maybe like ready to act on it more like 6 months ago, that almost all of my friends and community were believers. And I was like, what do I do with that? How do I like put myself out there more and just like meet more people so that my world opens up a bit? That's not the way I grew up, but that's where I found myself in a recent season. And I think another key part of like sharing your faith with others and even being in a place where you can notice others is by putting yourself in different like contexts, going to like you were saying with spiritual eyes. Like if I go to my kids' like soccer game, even if it's at a church league, like not every single person is gonna know Jesus. Not every single person is going to be in a place where they're fully at peace in their lives and feeling the abundant life that he promises. So that's a journey I've been on, is just also figuring out like how to put that lens on, asking God for that. And then also like, what actions can I take to literally just meet more people outside of the Christian circles. I joined a women's golf club a couple of weeks ago.
All right.
First of all, because I'm not good and I want to be better.
Okay.
But also it's been this really neat kind of chance to just like be out in the community, meeting new people, having a chance to just even practice like building relationships and asking questions and being curious and like noticing people in those places. Are there things that you do like that, practices that you have outside of like your normal day-to-day routines, or do you find that they kind of encompass the opportunities naturally?
Yeah, I think there's a mix of both things. I think the first thought that I had is the default pattern of operation for most of us is we're trying to constantly synthesize a wealth of information and come to an actionable conclusion so that you can make decisions about how to move through life. And the problem is then we're making assumptions about people around us all the time, and we're unaware that we're operating based on assumptions. And so even like, the thing I find is even at church on a Sunday, like most of the people here aren't Christians. Or if they are, they haven't really thought deeply about what that means, and it hasn't then impacted their behavior. There's something else that's attracted them. There's other longings and needs, but they haven't really worked through what that is. So again, not making those assumptions and asking those questions, whether I'm in whatever Christian environments or not, I think that's where, most people would be deeply surprised at maybe the superficial understanding of Christianity that people around us have. And we don't know that because we're not curious, because we've made assumptions. Oh, you're already in the faith. And so if you have needs or questions, you're going to tell me. And really, I have to care enough about you to go, how did you become a Christian? What's it mean that you're a Christian? How's it changed your life? And if you start just asking basic questions, you'll be surprised at what people tell you.
That makes sense.
And the goal of that is not to expose their deficiencies. It's to help lead them towards Christ wherever
because they're
at.
already exploring to a degree. So there's some sort of like momentum that's happening probably in their lives.
Yeah, and we need each other, right, in order to grow deeper roots. But then, I don't know how you exist in the world today without being around unchurched or I don't even know if I want to use that term, without being around people who are not following Christ. I mean, they're everywhere. And that's true, as you mentioned, in my physical therapy practice, but it's true in my hobbies. It's true in hanging out with my kids and their friends.
Yep.
It's true at the grocery store, right? It's true with my gardeners. It's true with my, it's everywhere.
Yeah, sure.
And so I don't know that I've intentionally thought, I need to go find more friends or relationships with people that aren't believers.
Yeah.
Because I just find that my life is full of them if I'm looking for them. And so, yeah, that's how I'd answer that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
One other thought, maybe the last thought I was thinking of walking through, we were talking with someone last night, our friend who serves overseas, and he was encouraging us to adopt this mentality of when you have the chance to share your faith, if you don't bring this person to completion and then they're praying the sinner's prayer at the end of your conversation, don't adopt this feeling of failure when that happens, because in fact, probably that conversation that you had with someone was a result of many other seeds that have been planted over time, maybe even prayers that have been prayed for that person. And I thought that makes so much sense, yet it feels pretty novel. I think we can adopt this responsibility of if I have the chance to share my faith with someone, then I better see it come to success, which is them going, you know what, I want that and I want to follow Jesus. And that's beautiful, but that's probably the rarity. One thing he said was the whole gospel is not on your shoulders. You as one person, you aren't responsible for the whole thing. You're responsible to obey God in those moments. And what would your thoughts be on that?
Well, man, so many. They're flooding my brain right now. I mean, the first thing is, one of the things that Jesus does and Scripture does is it compares gospel sowing with farming.
Yep.
And this idea that there's soil that has to be plowed, there's seed that has to be planted.
Yeah.
It needs sunlight and food, nutrition from the soil, and water to grow. And at some point, it's ready to be harvested, right? At some point, that fruit's ready to come into the kingdom.
And
so
the
those are the
every
conversations.
Yeah.
And you don't know that. In fact, we don't even know really why a seed grows in the ground.
Yeah.
And so, you don't know if you're plowing with a person. You don't know if you're planting the seed. You don't know if you're watering that seed or if it's coming to time to harvest that seed. I mean, I can give you examples from my own life where I've seen all of those things happen. The very first friend that I had who was a Muslim, who grew up a Muslim, and I shared the gospel with, the very first person like that who came to faith, did it in a moment where I met them. We had a deep conversation. I shared the gospel, and his response blew me out of the water. He said, I've been hearing those stories that you just shared with me since I was a kid. Because Islam embraces the Torah, the Old Testament. And so a lot of the stories that people are taught are very similar. He said, but also, and he went through this history of the last 7 years of his life where he lived by a church and he heard these worship songs and he had friends and family members and he had heard the gospel. I don't know how many times, but many times. It just didn't make sense to him. And so in that moment, when I shared it with him, the light bulb came on or the fruit was ready to harvest or whatever it was that happened. It wasn't that I shared anything new or novel. It's just the Spirit moved and those pieces came together and it was time to harvest and he came to faith. But there's lots of other people, man, where I've, plowed hard ground and removed rocks from the soil, right? Pull obstacles out of people's paths.
And you may never know.
And you never know if
later.
It landed or didn't land. And one of the things, that's one of the lessons I learned. It's it's not on me to grow that seed. It's on me to kind of find out the condition of the field and then connect to whatever that field needs to,
Yeah.
to bring that fruit to harvest.
Yeah, it really
Sometimes
removes
you know
this
that,
barrier.
but sometimes you don't.
Yeah, it removes this barrier of like, I need to convince or persuade
Yeah.
or force.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what we do when we share our faith. It's
But
so
but
much
if
more
your
about
motive
that.
was, if what's underneath is, man, God loves you, and I know that your life cannot be what it should be unless it's fully realized inside of Christ, then that's the fuel that motivates you to find out where somebody is and help them take the next step, whether or not they recognize they're taking a next step.
That's really good.
Yeah.